Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So I have amendments to the motion, which we will deal with here and now. There's of course a speaking list to the main motion, but let's deal with Ms. Khalid's amendments. I think, Ms. Khalid, if you're agreeable, I'll do them as kind of 1, 2, 3, because I suspect you might have different shifting support. So I was going to do maybe a vote on the striking the minister. Okay. All right. So the amendment is to strike the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize for having to interrupt just before you read, just to get clarity on the proposed amendment, if we can have that amendment sent to us. In addition, is it possible if by unanimous consent, maybe we can get a compromise here to sustain the witnesses that were submitted by the Conservatives, including Minister Guilbeault, in addition to adding the other witnesses proposed by the Liberals. I'd be happy to vote in consensus if we can just invite all of the witnesses and do away with the fact that we'd have to vote. Maybe it's just a recommendation.
Yeah, no, well, that's what I was trying to work through. So I think Ms. Khalid would like to present them as a package, which means which could present a sub-amendment to the amendment. But
Chair, so just to address the concern of the member, what I'm proposing, specifically with respect to the Minister for Environment, he has no responsibility in SDTC. He has nothing to do with the file. It would be a waste of our committee resources for us to have him. We've already had Minister Champagne, and I'm sure Minister Champagne is willing to come again. The person who is responsible for the file. So it just doesn't make sense for us to include a minister who has no authority over this file that we're talking about.
Right, and you would like to present this. So your amendment to the motion is to remove strike still for Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, and then add the Auditor General and the Commissioner of the RCMP. That is the amendment. First of all, I had Madame Tecla-Desgagnés wanted to speak on it first, I believe, and then after that, I see Mr. Perkins. I do have a list running on the side, which is Mr. Desjardins, Mr. Brock, and Mr. Genuis. So I'm going to, yeah, sure, but I'm going to keep that. So, gentlemen, if you can put your hand down, and if you want to or keep your hand up if you want to be on this amendment to the motion list.
Yeah, Chair, point of order. I would like to be on both. But
okay, that's fine.
I think right at the beginning regarding the amendment issue. So wherever I fit on the list.
Mr. Desjardins, you'd like to speak to the amendment as well? Amendment to the motion?
Yeah, I would like to speak to the amendment just as a matter of reply.
Right now, I just confirming. I'll come back to you. So, Madame Tecla-Desgagnés, you have the floor first.
Oh, of course. Apologies.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to my colleague for having tabled this motion that I find to be a good motion, and there are some names that I would like to add to this list. So, as a friendly amendment, if everyone agrees, or a sub-amendment to Ms. Khalid's amendment, the Auditor General submitted the list of the 90 cases of conflict of interest that have not been resolved and for which procedures were not complied with. And they include the names of people who were in conflict of interest. I would like these names to be included in the list. We have already have Ms. Verschuren, but I would like to add others. Okay. I will return to these suggestions. For the time being, we're just going to discuss Ms. Khalid's 3 suggestions. And so if you would like to support those, or if you would like us to change the names, then so let's focus on those 3 names for now. Okay. I'm okay with the additional names that were added. And I would say I agree that I don't think we're going to be able to gain anything very useful from speaking to Mr. Guilbeault. And so I am in agreement with Ms. Khalid's amendments.
Merci beaucoup. C'est
Thank you.
Mr. Perkins.
We now have Mr. Perkins.
Pour mes sous-amendements?
Can you put me back on the list for my sub-amendments? No, we're going to resolve this topic, and then after that, you will be on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the amendment, maybe I would start because there seems to be a little confusion because the Minister Champagne's name was mentioned. We still have an existing study motion. This is a supplement to it. On the existing study motion, it has Francois-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Industry, Simon Kennedy, the Deputy Minister. It has Francis Bilodeau, the ADM at Innovation Science Technology. It has Paul Booth, the current acting chair, so the other ones are in addition that are on my motion. And it has Zaid Rahim, who is as you know, is the acting president. These are already on that, and there's some people from PCO as well. So this list is in addition, not as a substitution for that previous motion on the existing study. And in that addition, and I have no issues with the amendment to B, as I understand it. I'd like to see it just to make sure I understand what it is again. But just by way of explanation on Minister Guilbeault indeed does have quite a bit to do with this, since he was the in-house lobbyist for 10 years before he was elected for the primary beneficiary of the Green Slush Fund, and in his public declarations on his conflict of interest. He lists Cycle Capital still as being a shareholder. He did not divest himself of the primary beneficiary of the Liberal Green Slush Fund when he became a minister. And since he's become a minister, the value of Cycle Capital has tripled with the amount of money that's been going into it. So that's the rationale for it. I'm obviously would prefer to have him, but if the committee doesn't feel that way, I guess we'll see that in the amendment. And perhaps, I don't know, I probably can't ask a question. I just want a clarification. So the suggestion is to add the RCMP in before it says Auditor General. Is that correct?
Well, it is too.
Or it's adding both of them?
It's strike Guilbeault, and then there'll be a new number.
Oh, as additional witnesses.
Yeah, so additional witness,
still
Auditor
leaving
General of Canada, RCMP Commissioner.
You're right.
Nope.
So it was additional witnesses. I wasn't quite.
Yeah, so we're only talking about the motion that you have presented
Right.
today. We're not talking about any other
Right.
motions that are have passed through this committee.
But you were adding them
before.
as additional witnesses, not.
So I'm
Yes.
adding 2 witnesses
Okay.
And removing 1 as proposed.
Okay. Now,
All right,
thank
Mr.
you.
Perkins, you are done. I've got Mr. Genuis and Mr. Desjardins, Ms. Khalid, and then Mr. Brock. This is all on the amendment with these 3 names. 1 we're removing, Guilbeault. The other 2 we're adding. I am going to enforce we speak to that amendment only. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was flabbergasted by some of Ms. Khalid's opening comments. She described our inquiries in this regard as being like a fishing expedition. If this is like fishing, it's like going to a barrel full of fish and grabbing fish out of it. It's evident that the volume of corruption, there's no question that there were violations of basic norms around conflict of interest here. So using idioms that suggest this is sort of speculative investigation is pretty outrageous, and seems like the member is trying to deny some of the basic conclusions of the Auditor General's report. I did have a specific comment on the amendment. That is, Ms. Khalid seems to be taking issue with the motion that, yes, it was a Conservative motion, but it was passed by a majority of the House of Commons in June regarding requesting documents. That motion used the unfettered powers of the House of Commons to send for documents. This is a clearly well-established constitutional principle. And I'm happy to talk about that motion, the work that Conservatives are doing with the support, in this case, of all opposition parties, to get to the bottom of the corruption we've seen in this government. But look, I think I can offer a sub-amendment that will help us discuss this in a more fruitful way, and that is we should have the law clerk in, because the law clerk works for us.
Mr. Janice, I'm going to stop you there. The same rule that I applied to Ms. St. Clair, you can make additions to the motion when that time comes. This is not the time. We're dealing with these three names right now. You're either in support, or you can propose a sub-amendment to strike one of the names if you disagree. But that is where we're at.
Here's what I'm doing with a sub-amendment. I'm proposing a sub-amendment to replace the RCMP commissioner on that list with the law clerk, because the law clerk it seems like the person, the mover of this amendment, is actually looking for. They're looking for someone who can answer questions about the appropriateness of that June motion, about some of the procedural or constitutional issues associated with that request for documents. In the abstract, the RCMP commissioner may have an opinion on this, but if this is a question of constitutional legal authority, the appropriateness of sending for these documents, the discretion that's available to the House. It was a decision of the House, not of this committee. I should underline, but it does relate to work this committee is doing. So I think if members want to probe that issue, I think we can talk about it. So I just propose that sub-amendment, that we replace the RCMP commissioner with the law clerk on this list.
Okay, I'm starting a new speaking list for the sub-amendment to the amendment, which is to strike the RCMP commissioner and replace with the House of Commons law clerk. Are there speakers? Ms. Khalid, and then Mr. Deja. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor first.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite perplexed, actually. I'm not sure why Mr. Genuis feels that we should be removing the RCMP commissioner from this list. And, of course, as we're having this discussion, we can add witnesses and discuss the importance of these witnesses to the context of what exactly it is that we're studying. And to be clear, and I do want to quote this article that I had referred to earlier, where it is said, quite simply, an RCMP investigation is the only way to fully, this is from, according to letters tabled over the summer in the House of Commons and its Public Accounts Committee, the order created significant consternation with the Office of the Auditor General and the RCMP. The letters also reveal that neither the Office of the Auditor General nor the RCMP found evidence of criminal wrongdoing while looking into SDTC. On July 10th, Hogan wrote House of Commons clerk Eric Jans to inform him that she would not comply with the order because it would compromise her office's work. She also noted that if the RCMP wants her files, it can obtain a production order to obtain them legally. I am not able to respond to the order at this time, she wrote to Jans, arguing that the records she audited don't belong in her office, but to the government. What I'm trying to say is, and I think Mr. Genuis misunderstood what the point that I'm trying to get at here, Chair, is that the role of our committee is not to be a judiciary. It is not to dictate to the Auditor General, to the RCMP, how they should be conducting their work. The role of parliamentarians is not to dictate to these institutions that we have created to have that oversight. And by doing so, by continuing down this road, we are abusing the power of Parliament. And that is not correct. That is not fair. And so my whole point of adding these two names, the Auditor General and the RCMP Commissioner, is to make sure that we have the full context of what exactly is happening here. I've never gone fishing, Chair. I've never had fish in a barrel, and I'm sure Mr. Genuis probably hasn't either. Based on his comments on lobsters, the Atlantic shore earlier. But what we're trying to do here is be responsible, be reasonable, and if we are going down this path, then let's have the full context. And let's be effective and efficient in how we are conducting our business as parliamentarians. It makes no sense to invite a minister who has nothing to do with this file. It makes no sense to exclude somebody who has clearly on the record had so much to say about exactly what it is that we're trying to do. Has had so much to say about a motion that was passed in Parliament that is a potential abuse of parliamentary powers to basically dictate to the RCMP how they should be doing their job, to basically dictate to the Auditor General how she should be doing her job. And if we want to continue down this path, then I think that both of those voices need to be at the table. And if Mr. Genuis wants to add an additional name, including the law clerk, as he's just posed in his sub-amendment, then he should propose that as a separate amendment and add the name rather than replace a name. And the fact that he's trying to replace a name, I think, tells a complete story in and of itself. Why is he trying to replace this name? Why is he wanting the RCMP commissioner not to come to this committee, not to talk about the potential abuses of power that the Conservatives are playing at here? So I really think that this should be a game of addition, not of subtraction. For sure, you know, I've laid my points out very reasonably to say Minister Guilbeault should not be invited here because he has nothing to do with the issue here. If it was an issue that involved him, sure. This issue does not involve him. Do we want the full context of exactly what is happening here? Yes. Then include the Auditor General, include the RCMP Commissioner, and sure, if Mr. Genuis wants to include the law clerk, sure. But why is he trying to replace the RCMP Commissioner? And I obviously do not support this sub-amendment, and I'm more than happy to support any additions that Mr. Genuis has to propose to this list, but I will not be subtracting and as somebody who has relevant contextual testimony to give to this committee about what exactly is happening in this instance when it is on record where the RCMP investigation is, and it's on record how these independent offices feel about this Conservative motion and its implications to our democracy here in Canada and its overstepping and abuse of powers by certain parliamentarians. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm turning now to Mr. Desjardins. This, again, is the sub-amendment to the amendment, which is, and I'm going to, again, I have three lists now. Mr. Desjardins, you're on the top of all three of them. So I'm going to corral you so your comments are on the sub-amendment, which is to remove the Commissioner of the RCMP and replace him with the House of Commons law clerk. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you using the word corral. As a former cattle rancher, it really means a lot, and I can fully appreciate what you mean by trying to corral me, so I'll do my best to ensure that I can speak directly to the sub-amendments. Largely speaking, Mr. Chair, I do believe that we can find a consensus, and I think we often, me and you, agree of attempting to try to find a consensus and pathway forward. I find myself attempting to balance what is the need for true accountability, true responsiveness to a really serious concern of the operations of SDTC with partisan witch hunting. These are really tough for me to balance, and I think something that you struggle with as well, Chair. And so as a matter of a proposition to my colleagues, I think I agree under the first sub-amendment with Mr. Genuis. But before I agree in full part to that, I would suggest that we'd rather than go about the process of amendment, second amendment, sub-amendment, can we have an agreement to simply add any names, including the sustaining Minister Guilbeault as the witness, and proceed with our meetings on these topics? I think it's obvious to me that there are questions that members of our committee have for every witness that's been put forward on this list, and they're gonna use those witnesses for whatever they're going to use them for, no matter what. And so I suggest that we just increase the list, be reasonable with each other, and I'd propose that under all these amendments, to collapse all three amendments, have a consensus of our committee, because Canadians really expect us to do work here. And I really want to get to the bottom of what is a very real issue that's been going on consecutively for, forever. These issues of procurement aren't just liberal ones; they're also conservative ones. I'm sure there's been instances provincially as well where even New Democrats or even bloc members have to deal with these issues as well. So I really suggest that we take a more serious approach to this, add as many witnesses that we deem appropriate for the further study of this report, including the minister, including the RCMP, including the law clerk, and get to a consensus on this. That would be my proposition, Chair, and I think we can get there if we can try to avoid the obvious partisan back and forth that's sucking up committee time here.
Okay. I'm going to summarize that, Mr. Desjardins, because I think you're in the column of just additions, and you would like to see Minister Guilbeault remain, as well as the Auditor General, as well as the RCMP Commissioner, and you're agreeing with Mr. Genuis on the law clerk. So I have a speaking list, Ms. Khalid, so I'm going to have to come back to you. This is Mr. Genuis' sub-amendment, and he's actually up next, so maybe we'll see what he has to say about that proposition. Instead of swapping, Mr. Genuis, you would agree to have them both there. But again, it's your sub-amendment, so over to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the abstract, my view of what's ideal hasn't changed in terms of who can shed the most light on the specific issue. But I think Mr. Desjardins is proposing a good way forward in terms of finding consensus, which is to say addition of witnesses, not subtraction of witnesses. And if there are individuals that particular members think are important to hear from, then others may be surprised to find that they have more to offer than they expected on the particular topic. My point on the RCMP commissioner was simply that if the goal is to talk about the legal and constitutional issues around sending for documents, the law clerk is the appropriate person for that. But hey, if other people want to ask questions to the RCMP commissioner on various things. But I would say if we're going to try to establish consensus on the principle that it's addition and not subtraction, we can't be selective about that, right? Because our view is that Minister Guilbeault has some important context to add to this conversation. So I guess the appropriate way of proceeding would be by unanimous consent or by agreement. If we can agree that Minister Guilbeault stays on the list and that we add the RCMP commissioner, the law clerk, and the auditor general, and then we get back to the main motion so that Ms. Sinclair Gagné can propose additional names and then others propose additional names, then I think that's a good way to proceed.
Okay. Well, before, there's a few steps to get there. It's not quite that easy, but I do have Ms. Yip and then Ms. Khalid. So Ms. Yip, you have the floor. Mr. Desjardins, I'm going to ask you to put your hand down, unless you want to speak again, but I think you're covered. So Ms. Yip, you have the floor, please. And then after that, Ms. Khalid.
Well, with respect to Mr. Desjardins, I feel that opening up to any names, just adding willy-nilly, I think that we just need to be conscious of our time here on the committee and the purpose of this committee. We've already been looking at how many meetings of ArriveCan? Over 25 now meetings? And yet there's so much of the other reports that need to be addressed by the Auditor General that we put so much work on the back bench, on the back burner. And we really need to get back to that because there is more to life than just ArriveCan. There are other issues that Canadians are concerned about and issues that the Auditor General has raised. So I do agree that with the sub-amendment to have the Auditor General, the RCMP, the law clerk, as I like to support Ms. Khalid. There is no point in having Minister Guilbeault come It's again, we want to really be targeted and precise in our time of the witnesses that come so that this doesn't just drag on. There has to be a whole purpose. And I do think that offering Minister Champagne is more relevant, and that would be a better use of time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Ms. Khalid. Then, Mr. Janice, I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to see if you're willing to make a. In order for you to withdraw your motion, you'd have to seek UC. Otherwise, we vote on it. But I'm going to hear Ms. Khalid first, and then you and I can talk. But I've got to go to Ms. Khalid next. She's been very patient. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. You're very kind. I think you're trying to make up for ordering that butter chicken. But I think that we should be precise and targeted if we're going to go down this path of this study. As I said earlier, I would propose, Chair, that Mr. Genuis, if he feels so inclined, should withdraw his sub-amendment and perhaps add an amendment after we've decided on mine. At a later time in this meeting, and stop creating confusion, because I would like to just vote on one thing at a time. I know Ms. St. Clair de Gagné has some witnesses that she wants to propose as well, and I'd like to hear what those names are as well, and see how we can be more productive in this meeting rather than going back and forth and trying to scratch out names and adding more and scratch out more and adding more. It just doesn't make sense to me. So, Chair, if it's okay with you, I would prefer that we stick with voting on the sub-amendment, or Mr. Genuis can withdraw his sub-amendment and we can vote on my amendment and then move on to the proposal of Ms. St. Clair de Gagné.
So there's a few steps. I mean, we would, depending on what Mr. Genuis does, we would then return to your amendment to the motion. So, Mr. Genuis, I think you'll get where you want to go if you seek UC to dissolve your sub-amendment. You will then have an opportunity later to propose the law clerk. Would you like to do that?
Yes, sure. I'd like to retain the floor to speak on the amendment as well. But
hold on a second. Hold on.
Okay.
It won't work like you will get an opportunity again. I will add you, but I'm keeping multiple lists here. But I will add you, so you'll get an opportunity, and you will have your say. So I'm looking for.
To request unanimous consent to withdraw the sub amendment. That's fine. I think we're getting to where I wanted to land. So.
Okay. Do I have agreement for Mr. Genuis's sub amendment to be withdraw and to be okay? Good. All right. Very good. Thank you. Now I'm going back to the amendment, and I have a speaking list here already. Mr. Desjardins is at the top of it. This is Ms. Khalid's amendment to withdraw and remove Mr. Guilbeault, Minister Guilbeault, and add the OAG and the RCMP commissioner. I can almost predict what you're going to say, Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I feel it's probably not a surprise to you or members of our committee that I'd seek compromise on this. I think it's important that we probably keep all of these witnesses. If there are members who are proposing questions to the minister should be present to answer those questions, particularly as it relates to the transition of the file. The transition of it towards NRC, like we heard today, there's many questions that went unanswered. I think the minister whose directive is responsible for that order of transition is likely well informed on how to make that decision. In addition to the other names that were put forward by Ms. Khalid, I would also agree that those are important names to add to our list. Balancing with what Ms. Yip has said of trying to ensure that we have a scope that isn't broad, so broad that it creates a study that is impossible to understand is also a concern I have. But largely said, that concern I think is mitigated by the fact that having these persons present is likely better than not having them testify at all for the purpose of understanding that scope. And so if this is the entire scope, and if these are all the names, then at least we know the breadth and limits of it. And so if these are the breadths and limits, then I think this is actually a pretty reasonable and productive conversation amongst all of us today, because now we have a whole list. We have I don't know how many it is now, a dozen names that should give us brevity to schedule meetings with at least some of these on this topic, which is, I think, a favorable outcome for you too, Mr. Chair. And I think it would be and is enticing to me as a member of this committee to see consensus on what I think is a serious issue. If we have questions for witnesses and if members have witnesses to put forward, let's ask them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Khalid, you're speaking again to your sub-amendment. I can move you down
If you can, Chair,
Yep.
move me down, I'd appreciate that.
Yep.
I'd like to listen to what
Yep.
my colleagues have to say first before
Very
I
good.
comment.
Mr. Brock, you have the floor if you're still willing to speak. Otherwise, I'll go to Mr. Pardon me? All right. Mr. Genuous, you have the floor. This is Ms. Khalid's amendment that adds both the RCMP and the Auditor General and removes Minister Guilbeault.
Thank you. So Mr. Desjardins, I think, made a good suggestion, but didn't formalize it with a sub amendment, which I think which I think is procedurally required, unless there's, unless we want to proceed by UC, but it's maybe just cleaner to just remove the sub amendment. So the sub amendment is to uncancel Mr. Guilbeault.
I think he means to keep him on the list, but yes.
Yeah, to
Yes.
uncancel, to remove the proposed cancellation and to keep him on the list, so that if the
No, but this
and the amendment.
okay. Order, Mr. Juniors. No, this is in order. So we are debating Ms. Khalid's sub amendment with the three individuals, and Mr. Genuous is making a sub amendment to strike her suggestion that we remove Mr. Guilbeault. Mr. Genuous wants to keep Mr. Guilbeault.
Yes, and just to briefly motivate, I think that's consistent with the consensus we want to establish, which is to say, let's as Mr. Desjardins said, we're not leaving a massive, unlimited, open-ended bucket of witnesses. We are defining witnesses in the motion, but on the basis of what different parties see as being important. Mr. Perkins already gave some specific reasoning around Mr. Guilbeault, and I think all parties will likely have questions they want to ask him. So let's keep in the RCMP commissioner. Sure, let's keep in the Auditor General. I think we'll have a chance to add the law clerk later, but let's also leave in Mr. Guilbeault. Thanks.
All right. Ms. Khalid, I'm afraid you have the floor. So the Mr. Genuous sub-amendment is for consideration to keep Minister Guilbeault on our list of witnesses. And Ms. Khalid, I have to ask you to speak to this. You're next. Yes.
Chair, I don't really have more to say, as I have already made my points as to why Mr. Guilbeault should not be included in this list, and I'm prepared to go to a vote on the sub-amendment at this time.
All right. I do have another speaker. It's Mr. Brock. You have the floor. All right. Clerk, could you call a roll call on this? This is the sub-amendment. This will determine whether Minister Guilbeault remains as a witness that will be called or not. So, if you vote in favor of the sub-amendment, Mr. Guilbeault will remain. If you vote against sub-amendment, Mr. Guilbeault will be struck as a witness. Is that clear?
Not quite.
I will allow people to raise questions, but voting yes means you would like Mr. Guilbeault to appear. Voting no means he will not be called by this committee at this time. Clerk, call a roll call.
Ms. Khalid.
I vote against this sub-amendment.
Right.
Ms. Bradford.
I vote against the sub-amendment.
Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Wheeler.
Against.
Ms. Yip.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
For.
Mr. Brock. Mr. Genuous.
Yes.
Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés.
Non.
Mr. Desjardins.
I am in favor, yes.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
Thank you. The sub-amendment is defeated. We now go back to the amendment, which is effectively now to add the OAG and the RCMP. Is there debate on that, or could I call a vote? Clerk, could you call a vote? So if you vote yes, you are voting for us to invite the OAG and the RCMP commissioner. And if you vote against, you are voting to not have them appear at this time. And Mr. Guilbeault will be, as part of this amendment, we effectively voted on that, will not be appearing.
Yeah, so just a point of order, Chair. I mean,
yes.
If this amendment is defeated, then Mr. Guilbeault appears, and if this amendment is, or at least is invited to appear.
That is a good clarification. Yes, if the amendment is defeated, Mr. Guilbeault, we go back to the original motion. Mr. Guilbeault is on it. The Auditor General and the RCMP are not. Clerk, call the vote, please.
Ms. Khalid,
I vote in favor.
Ms. Bradford,
I vote in favor.
Mr. Baines,
Yes.
Mr. Wheeler.
Yes, and just so you know, it's pronounced Weiler.
I'm sorry. Ms. Yip,
Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. Brock,
No.
Mr. Generous,
No.
Madame Sinclair Degagné,
Oui.
Mr. Desjardins.
No.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Very good. Ms. Khalid's amendment to the motion is passed. So we're going to return to the motion, in which I have a speaking list already. I'm going to clarify it, but I'm going to let you know what the speaking list is, so you're ready. It's Mr. Desjardins again, Mr. Brock, Mr. Genuis, and then Madame Sinclair Degagné.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry,
the
Chair.
amendment, and just to summarize it, the amendment now, or the motion now, does not include Mr. Guilbeault, but does include the RCMP Commissioner and the Auditor General. You have the floor, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do agree, just off the top, with inviting the RCMP and the other witnesses mentioned. You said the law clerk, and what was in the last one? But
no, the law clerk has not been added yet. You can move that, but it is the addition is the RCMP Commissioner and the Auditor General.
I understand. Okay. Well, I'm in full agreement with the RCMP and the Auditor General. And this, if Mr. Perkins, this is actually a question. We're on the original motion now, right? I can speak to the original motion?
As amended, yes.
As amended, of course. So, Mr. Perkins, I do appreciate you putting this together, this witness list, and I do appreciate your work on this file. And I'm often considerate to the fact that you're a very reasonable parliamentarian to work with. So I very much appreciate your presence on this committee. My question is regarding the inclusion of the founder of Cycle Capital, Andre Lise Metot. Just explanation as to your inclusion of that name. Is it because they're on the list of conflict of interest persons?
I'm going to have to add. Well, I'm going to seek UC for Mr. Perkins to answer Mr. Desjardins. It'd be brief. Do I have that agreement? Yes. It just Mr. Desjardins had a question for Mr. Perkins as to why he added a witness. The list is 6 deep. Mr. Perkins will be brief. If you don't mind, he'll answer Mr. Desjardins. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Perkins. Brief, you said, not me, you said. I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, you know how tough that is for me. Andre Lise Metot is not only the founder of Cycle Capital, but she was a director for 5 years of SDTC during the time and was specifically on the list, actually the one with the most conflicts on the list, according to the Auditor General.
Back to you, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins, for that. And I guess in consideration of that, would it be, because in the motion itself, this is just a matter of clarification. I'm sure we can get UC on it, to just include the fact that they're a former board member of STTC in addition to being the founder of Cycle Capital, just so there's consistency with the way the motion is worded. Because I think there's every other witness says, like Stephen Kucha, former board member, Guy, former board member. There's a couple other instances where it says that. Would it be useful for the committee, for clarity of our study, to include the Miss
Méthode.
in addition
Méthode?
to her Méthode, sorry,
Méthode.
Méthode, as an addition to the amendment to have to be included former board member of SDTC. So I think that's an important factor.
Sure. Is that agreeable with the committee? That's almost a stylistic. Yeah. No. It's basically just to add under Elise Méthode that the former board member SDTC, just for consistency. It's really housekeeping. Yeah. All right. I said that's passed. That's fine. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Desjardins?
Nothing else. Thank you very much.
Very good. Mr. Brock, you have the floor.
Explanation.
Mr. Brock, you have the floor.
My intervention had some certain points that I wanted to bring across has already been articulated, so I believe in efficiency, Chair, and I'm going to forfeit my round.
Very good. Mr. Genuis, this is your opportunity for the law clerk, if you like. Over to you.
Chair, I will move that we add the law clerk to the witness list.
Very good. I have a subamendment. No, I have an amendment now to the motion as amended. Is there any debate on adding the House Commons law clerk? Sure. Any opposition? I'm going to call that passed. Someone can yell for a vote if you like. That is passed. All right. The law clerk has been added as well. Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés, vous avez...
Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés, the floor is yours. Thank you. I'd like to add all the names that were found in the conflict of interest list from the AG. I'd also like to add, so any people who were involved in these conflict of interest, I'd like all names that were in the list. Judith Ataïd, Carl Landry, Alan McGregor, Ron Kudis, Jill Earthy,
Warmold et Erin Mahoney.
Est-ce que c'est sept?
Is that 7 people? 7, yes.
So we have an amendment from Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés to add 7 names. Would you like me to suspend to allow us time to distribute them to everyone? Yes, Chair. Okay, I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes to give the analysts and the clerk. They're just going to come as names, so you can all consider it. And then I have a new speaking list. First, Ms. Khalid, and then Ms. Desjardins. But I'm going to come back.
Just to clarify, are we asking for these 7 people to appear as witnesses?
I believe so. I'll come back to Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés once the list is back to you. About 5 minutes, I think.
We have a list of 7 people submitted from Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés. It was sent out. Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés has the floor. After that, I have Mr. Desjardins. So the floor is yours. I don't have much to add other than the fact that in the list of 10 ineligible projects, many of them are also in the conflict of interest list. An interesting fact. So in the end, they were ineligible but received funding. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from these witnesses and ask them questions about these identified conflict of interests. Thank you.
Mr. Desjardins, then I'll turn to another member after that. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do agree with the proposed amendment to invite the additional members who are found in conflict of interest as identified earlier as well. And I think it would be important that committee members see that. My only question, Chair, regarding this is the format of the meetings on this. And I think this is maybe a subject that under further reflection is something we'll deal with in subcommittee related to how these witnesses will come, because I think there is advantage to having them come as a group in addition to several other witnesses, because I do now see there's going to be a procedural issue of trying to invite all of these witnesses. It's not likely that all of them would attend at the same time, but I do think for the purpose of narrowing our study, we could ensure that the subsequent meetings on this topic are organized in such a way that we get the best kind of organization possible. And I think these witnesses in particular come forward regarding the information on conflict of interest, which I think some other witnesses could also overlap with, including the AG.
Oh, Mr. Desjardins, I will commit to having a subcommittee meeting the first week Parliament comes back, so we can pick that up. Exactly. I think you make a good point there. And I also heard that you I think you agree with Madame Sécla-Dingay's amendment to the motion as amendment. Now I'm turning to Ms. Khalid. You have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to be on the speaking list for the main motion. I support Madame Sécla-Dingay's addition to the list of witnesses.
Okay. We'll have a roll call vote for this. This is to add the 7 names, even though I think there's broad agreement. I don't. Well, I think so. Well, that's why we have roll call. So why don't you just call the vote, clerk? This is to add the 7 names que Madame Sécla-Dingay nous a proposé. Over to you.
Okay. Ms. Khalid.
I vote in favor.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Weiler.
Support.
Ms. Yip.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Genius.
In favor.
Madame Sinclair-Degagné.
Oui.
And Mr. Desjardins.
Yes.
All in favor.
All right. We are now back to the motion as now twice amended, which is the. Oh, Madame Bradford.
Oui.
Oui. Pardon. Which is the list that Mr. Perkins presented, less we struck Minister Guilbeault. We have added the law clerk, and we have added the additional 7 witnesses who are potentially in a conflict of interest. That is the motion. Any discussion on it, or shall I call a vote? Yes, as twice amended, yes.
Chair, I have one amendment to propose.
Okay.
As I indicated earlier when I spoke to this motion before, the Auditor General has just conducted a value for money audit on the SDTC, and it has just been tabled in Parliament just a few short months ago. So perhaps I think it would be best to wait while the Auditor General comes before this committee. We can ask her the relevant questions on SDTC and question her on this audit, how much a performance audit would overlap with her current work, and if it would be more beneficial to wait until the new processes are fully in place before we request or overstep, in many ways, asking her to do something. I mean, it is really her prerogative. I think that it is probably better for us to come to a conclusion into what it is that we're doing here, and have her appear before the committee, answer the questions that we may have for her, and then go from there. And obviously, the committee can decide to bring forward a motion at a later time once we have more information, and perhaps with better scope and precision as to how we proceed forward on this.
So your amendment
So basically,
is to
my
strike
amendment
B.
is to strike B.
All right. So I have an motion to the amendment. Pardon me. I have an amendment to the motion, twice amended, to strike B. Mr. Perkins, I saw your hand go up. I assume you want the floor to discuss this.
Yeah, just to correct the record, the report by the Auditor General is not a forensic audit. It's not a value for money audit. It was a modest governance audit. It only sampled 226 transactions, a small portion of the ones that were done in the period by the Auditor General's own admission. And there's sufficient evidence since the Auditor General's appearance, in addition to the list that was added of additional information. For example, the Auditor General had not categorized the value of the 90 undeclared conflicts, which turned out to be over $250 million. Or declared conflicts, I should say, not the undeclared ones. So this committee is, and the Auditor General is not currently doing anything on SDTC. And this committee is asking for something different than MP Khalid is suggesting, which is to delay, rag the puck, and hope that it all goes away. We're asking for a much more traditional audit by the Auditor General of what the public would know as a forensic audit, but we're in this motion, it's called a value for money and performance audit. That's the Auditor General's current term. That is not what she did before. And so I would object vehemently to the government's attempt to stop the further investigation by the Auditor General of SDTC with this deletion from the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. You have the floor. And just to reiterate, Ms. Khalid is not, in fact, the government, a member of this committee.
I am not the government.
I do occasionally refer to you as a government member, but you are here as a member. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. And very respectfully, I will also vehemently disagree with what Mr. Perkins has said, because nothing that the Auditor General does is modest. Her office takes every performance audit very, very seriously. And if she felt that more work was necessary, she would conduct that appropriate audit herself. We don't need to dictate to anyone. And I think that if we are going down this path of inviting all of these witnesses and hearing from her as well in this committee, that we can pose those questions to her. I think that we should be very careful in how we are conducting ourselves and making sure that we are bringing whatever issues to light that need to be raised, and giving the Auditor General the freedom to basically do her work, which she takes very, very seriously. And I really appreciate, being part of Public Accounts, having seen all of her reports and the amount of work that her and her office does. I don't think we should be dictating to her. I think that we should have her in the committee to listen to what she has to say, answer everybody's questions, listen to what all the witnesses have to say, and then perhaps decide exactly how we want to proceed. I think this is a little bit early in the game for us to be dictating to anybody what to do.
Thank you very much. I have no other speakers. Clerk, I'm going to have you call the roll call. This is a vote to strike Part B. If you vote in favor, the ask of the Auditor General to undertake a value for money audit will be removed from this motion. And if you vote no, it will remain in the motion. Over to you, Clerk.
I vote in favor. Ms. Bradford.
Oui.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Weiler.
Yes.
Ms. Yip.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Brock.
No.
Mr. Genuis.
No.
Madame Saint-Clair-Lagagné.
Non.
Mr. Desjardins.
No.
5-5.
All right, and I will vote the Part B will remain in the motion. I'm now. Pardon. I'm now turning. Hold on a second. On the motion, which you table, which has now been twice amended, was amended more than that, which has now had numerous names added to it, one struck. Over to you, please, for maybe closing remarks, although I will look for other speakers.
I obviously will support the original motion, even though it has one glaring error of not having the shareholder, Minister Guilbeault, on the list as the government decided that they wanted to protect him from accountability on this subject. But I will be voting for the motion.
I'm seeing no other speakers. Clerk, could you call the vote on the motion as has been amended?
Ms. Khalid.
I vote in favor, Chair.
Ms. Bradford.
In favor.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Weiler.
In favor.
Ms. Yip.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes?
Sorry? Mr. Perkins.
I won't sigh as much, but yes.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
Yes.
Madame Saint-Clair-Lagagny.
Oui.
And Mr. Desjardins.
Yes.
10 yeses.
That is passed. Thank you all very much. Now, this is actually not the committee business that is on the agenda. I'm going to suspend this meeting for 2 minutes and then bring us back into committee business in public. Mr. Generous, I'll be providing an update on some correspondence that was requested. So, Mr. Generous, unless you have a point of order or it deals with the matter at hand, I'd ask you to wait, but I will come back.
Yeah, I just want to be on the list for committee business.
Okay, well,
Chair.
you will have an opportunity to raise your hand when we come back. But yeah, so I don't take names now. So the meeting was suspended for 2. I have a brief update, and then I will turn to some business and witness and members who are already in the queue. This committee had passed a motion over the summer looking for some information, or for Mr. Firth to respond to some committee testimony. We did receive that reply over the weekend. It will be translated and transmitted to you as soon as possible. We had also requested some information, an audio recording from CBSA. As of this morning, that had not arrived, and the clerk has already sent a note to request that information be sent right away. Mr. Perkins, you now have the floor, please, and I have a list of other members who wish to address the committee, but over to you first, sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members will recall that I think the correct terminology on meeting of June 20th of this committee was suspended. I'm not quite sure what the terminology is. The motion I had, it's not a study motion, but I would like I think I have to ask for consent of the committee, Mr. Chair, to restart the debate on my motion of June 20th. And I don't know if you want me to read the motion, but that motion was that given that the Auditor General's audit of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and given the government appointed board members approved A, 59 million towards 10 ineligible projects, B, 76 million towards 90 projects in which board members had conflicts of interest and violated internal conflict of interest policies, and in violation of the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act. C, $259 million towards 96 projects where the board members held conflicts of interest. D, 58 million towards projects without ensuring contribution agreement terms were met. That the committee therefore expresses extreme concern with the blatant disregard of taxpayer funds, and therefore calls on the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry to recoup these funds for Canadian taxpayers within 100 days following the adoption of this motion, and that the committee report this matter to the House.
Very good, Mr. Perkins. Any additional comments, or should I proceed through
the process stuff? I'm just looking at time.
Oh, I have additional resources. There is
well, I think we have to have a vote to restart the discussion about this motion. Is that correct?
Well, does anyone object to restarting this debate again?
Sorry, Chair. If I may.
Yes.
I'm not sure why we're going past the assigned committee time. We've been in this committee from 10 a.m. to it's now 2 p.m. We have another one on Thursday. I'm sure that we can perhaps resume debate on this on Thursday. Given that I would have appreciated a little bit of extra time. I do have some other obligations that I need to attend to. And given that we have been here for 4 hours talking about this, I would appreciate if we could have a little bit of leeway here.
All right. Well, how about we'll meet halfway then. We will pick up this debate then on Thursday after the meeting then. After the witnesses. Yep. Yes. Is that fine?
Yep.
All right. I still have a short list of other people that want to speak to other. Well, I have a few other hands up. So yours was one, but it sounds like you're satisfied. Is that correct, Ms. Cleary? Anything else to add?
I will remain on the list, Chair. I'm going
to move to the next person on the list, but it sounds like you're done for now. If someone,
for now, yes, but I'd like to be added to the bottom of the list.
I'll look for you before I do anything. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So my understanding is that there was consensus in the room, and I'm remote. So if there was consensus in the room that we have the debate on Mr. Perkins' motion on Thursday, that's fine with me. I had wanted to raise the issue of ArriveCan that you spoke about, Chair, which is the motion we adopted. We made two specific requests. One was a request for a response from Mr. Firth, and we were somewhat specific in what we were looking for in that response. I understand from you that response was provided on time, but obviously we need to wait for translation. That's part of the process here, so we'll be able to look at Mr. Firth's response to that motion that was adopted, asking him for information in response to Ms. Daly's testimony. So we'll be able to look at his response to that and then decide what kinds of follow-up, if any, is required on that. The other part of this is that Ms. Daly repeatedly referred to a lengthy interview she did with CBSA that clearly will have a lot of information in it that points to whether or not her claims are credible and correct, and whether there was in fact issues of intimidation and even interference from the government in terms of the process of that investigation. So we had requested that interview based on, I think, the normal committee timeline of 3 weeks, and that time has elapsed. And to just underline that we had requested that information, not from Ms. Daly. She said she didn't have it. It was an interview with her, with CBSA. She said it was recorded and the government has the recording. So we were quite specific. In fact, the motion says the committee order the production from the government of the recording. So it does seem that with the time that has elapsed, the government is now in breach of that production order. And I think it might make sense just to kind of explore this item, but by way of discussion, without moving any motion on it, because I would like some clarity. Has the government provided any kind of information regarding, okay, we're working on it, we're thinking about it, we're in the process of finding it, or has it just been crickets in response to our request? I think knowing that information will give us some sense of what we should do going forward. So I don't know, Chair, if you or if the clerk can provide some more color on that. This was very clear in the motion that we were asking for this not from Ms. Daly, but from the government. And the government has an obligation to comply with the committee's order for that information within the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks has elapsed. So if they've come back to us and said, could we have a little bit more time, that's different from them ignoring us completely. So I'd like to get a bit of a sense of where we're at.
So my understanding, it's been radio silence over the summer. We have sent another email today to remind them of the committee motion. What I'd recommend is now they've been sent a follow-up, and we give them the 48 hours for the next meeting, And if we get nothing back then, or an answer that we don't agree with, then we could consider taking steps as a committee. That's what I recommend doing. I think it's a bit rash to jump right into it. Of course, the committee can if they decide they wish to do so. But I think I would let's see what the answer comes back to the email that was sent this morning, and then assess the situation Thursday.
Yeah, and Chair, I'm happy to proceed as you've suggested, but I think it would be valuable if today, just verbally, I will, and I hope some other members will join me in putting the government on notice that this is an extremely important recording. Ms. Daly had absolutely explosive allegations in relation to effectively the fact that she perceived she was being pressured to blame certain individuals for what happened with ArriveCan, and that there would be consequences for her if she didn't blame those individuals. And I think this is the first time we potentially have access to a recording that would shed light on this really intense conflict within the senior public service over who was responsible for certain decisions around ArriveCan. So this is a critically important recording for actually answering the questions around who is responsible. We need this full recording to get to the bottom of it. The committee was unanimous in ordering the production of that, and I find it pretty surprising that we would get radio silence to that kind of request. It's not unusual, sadly, for there to be delays past timelines we've asked for, but it's not very common, even from the government, for them to just ignore the request completely. So this is very serious. Sure, 48 hours. We'll see where we are on Thursday, but I do hope members will join me in insisting that the government adheres to their obligations and does provide this recording to the committee.
Yes, Mr. Generous. I won't survey the committee on that. I'll take it upon myself to express my view as chair that House Commons committees do have the authority to request this. Of course, if governments refuse, we have steps to take that this committee has taken before, and we will do so again if collectively we feel it is important to do so. So I think your points are valid, and I'm sure they're shared by at least some of our colleagues on this committee. I personally view the rights of both committees and Parliament to seek information as one that is very important for us to both safeguard and enforce when necessary. On that, I think, Ms. Khalid, you might have had something you wanted to say, and if so, over to you.
No, Chair, I think that's a very reasonable approach that you have with respect to the concerns raised by Mr. Genuis, and looking forward to the conclusion of this meeting.
Okay, let me just check my notes here to make sure there's nothing else I'm missing. All right, before I seek your agreement to adjourn the meeting, we'll see you back here Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. You can expect some additional time to be added to the Thursday meeting to deal with the Mr. Perkins motion. On that, I will adjourn the meeting.